Hej! Välkomna alltihop till Arkitekturfilmfestivalens allra sista kväll. Ikväll ska vi avhandla ämnet arkitektur och konst. Vi har med oss en del vänner från utlandet, som Elisabet Haglund, som kommer att bli moderator för kvällens evenemang. Så Elisabet ska presentera sin panel.
Tack Peter, du som är organisatör för ArchFilm tillsammans med Mika. Welcome every one of you being public and everyone being in the panel, and especially to welcome to Daniel Abadi, who is the curator of the exhibition up Jean Dubuffet as architect. And we have here Pimlott from Delft University, living in Den Haag, and who is an architect. Mattias Givell, co-director, something like that, at Wanås exhibitions. Was it perfect? Yeah. And Magnus Jensner, you are there, director of Malmö Museum of Modern Art, Malmö Annex, or something like that. So we will start the evening to look at cuts or some parts of a film about Jean Dubuffet, and we will give the floor to Daniel Abadi, and then we will go up and look a bit to the exhibition with Jean Dubuffet, and afterwards we will give different thinkings from our panel about architecture and art. So let's start.
So, first thing, I wanted to have this movie which is one of the few, very, very few movies which exist with Dubuffet acting in the movie, because he refused all the movie, he refused to make interviews, and it was very difficult. And the reason why I think it's interesting, I know that, unfortunately, even for the Japanese television, he was speaking French. So it's in French, and I know that most of you will not understand what he says. But the reason is that for visual reason, this movie is important in relation to the exhibition upstairs. First, because it gives you the way Dubuffet was acting. This is the external view of the studio outside Paris in a suburb. And if you look at that, it looks really like a suburb construction. And everything was that way. The studio and the place you will see are very simple, poor buildings of the 50s done by very bad architects and furnishes with the worst furniture that you can find in a very, very uninteresting store. So the interesting point is to see the contrast between where he was working and what he was doing. And also the only thing which is interesting for me is that it gives you the scale of everything which is done, because you will see outside in the garden a certain amount of sculpture which are not here for any reason. And also you will see at the end something which is interesting, which is one of the last thing he has done when he has finished this Urlut time. You know, Dubuffet has been acting since 1944 to almost his death, because he stopped working some months before dying. He decided to stop working, which is the unique case I know of an artist who decided when he began and when he ended. He died in 84, so it's during 40 years, he has made this enormous amount of works, almost 10,000 works. And each was by series, and these series were lasting 1 year, 1 year and a half, 2 years. There is only one exception, which is just in the middle of the works. From 1962 to 1974, he has been working on what he called le cycle de l'Ourloup, the Ourloup circle. I cannot translate Ourloup because Ourloup is a word which doesn't exist in French. Ourloup doesn't mean anything, except that if for a French-speaking person, it sounds with a certain amount of things. And Dubuffet himself was telling about an old fairy tale about riquet à la houppe, like Ourloup, and things like that, and that it was also the loup, and but there is something he never mentioned. It was one of the first paintings he has painted in '62 called Rue de l'Entourloupe, where the word Ourloup is completely integrated. And Entourloupe is almost slang. And it's meant to make something which is not completely right, to make a sort of tour, something like the people with who ask you to find which is the face of the which will appear, and you are sure that you will lose, and this is Entourloupe. And in a certain sense, this is the general idea of this 12-year circle, to produce works where you have the idea that you see something, and as soon as you recognize something, you lose it to find something else, and you arrive in sort of complete mental space. And it's during this 12 years of l'Ourloup that he began to work with two different things, sculptures, and then from sculptures go to architecture. The origin of the thing is very simple. In '65, he received the first official thing. André Malraux decided that for the new Faculty of Science and Letters in Nanterre, they need to have two very large panels at the entrance. And after a lot of things, they asked Dubuffet in June of '65 to do two works of 8 meters by 24 each for next October, in June. And any normal artist would have said, it's impossible and I cannot do it. Of course, Dubuffet said yes. And he began to work. He had the idea, which was not a bad idea, that to make paintings in a university which will be the one where the events of 1968 began in France was probably not so obvious, and that maybe instead of oil on canvases, he has to make something more solid and more rigid. And he tried to make it as ceramics. So he asked, at that time he was spending half of the year in the south of France because his wife had some problem of health. And he go there and search one of the rather young ceramists who has been working for Fernand Léger. And this is, in a certain sense, also very funny because Dubuffet always told that he has nothing to do with the official culture, that he has nothing to do with the art history. But for example, since 1924, he was a close friend of Léger. And he always says, even at the end of his life, that it was part of his admiration in art, which were very small. And he go and got this man who has been doing the large ceramic facade of the Musée Léger in Yot. And they began to work together to make these two enormous ceramics of 24 meters long each. And Dubuffet was wanting to have the financial contract of the government. But in the urgency, he began to pay the elements. He bought everything, and at the end, of course, it was an enormous amount of money. And he was sending letters and letters, and nothing happened. And in June, he has spent really an enormous amount of money, because he was somebody who knows the figures, and so he kept everything in order. And he said at that time, but it was so long time ago, it was the 2 million francs that he has spent in 1965. This was enormous. To give you an idea, when I began to work in the museum, 4 years later, I was making 7,000 francs a month. So 2 million francs was really quite a lot of money. And the contract never arrived. And finally, in October, he decided that he will refuse anything. And in December, he sent a letter to say, choose another artist, I stop. And he lost all the money he has invested in that. But from that, he got different things which became the origin of his work for sculpture and architecture. First, the ceramist who has been working with Léger, at the beginning he gave him painting to reproduce, to see how it looks when there will be in ceramics. And this man who was accustomed to what Léger wanted, says, but instead of having the flat lines, I can make relief of the lines. And he transfers the things, and he make an experimental version of one of the panels. And this probably was very interesting for Dubuffet, with one problem. Dubuffet cannot accept that somebody will decide where there will be relief on the work and not himself. So he stopped this. He never used ceramic again. And at that time, we were in '66, he discovered a new material, which every artist at that time was discovering plastics. And mostly one thing, he was 64, and he discovered what called, I don't know the English name, polyurethane. It's probably the same. And this is the things that you use to make boxes for computers, for anything. White thing, very light, and so he can move by himself without any assistant a large volume of 1 or 2 square meters. And then he invented a small tool to cut in it. He just used the things that the people use for butter, just a wire inside of a thing, but he put an electric motor to hit the wire so that it can cut very easily in the thing and sculpt it as if. At the beginning, he was a painter. He has never done sculptures. He has done some sculptures in '53 that he called petits objets de la vie précaire, but it was more assemblage of things that he has found everywhere than real sculptures. And of course, at the beginning, he has no sense of space. So he made sculpture which were 4 painted faces put together like a volume. And then, probably from moment to moment, and I think you will see it in the exhibition, he arrived to create flat volumes, and then at the end to arrive to 3-dimensional volumes. Here you will see at the beginning of this, I lost my papers, so this, the first thing that you will see, you have to be quiet, it's small elements of 3-4 minutes. So don't worry if you don't understand anything, but even the voice and the way he's speaking, I think, give something. The first thing is the studio in Périgny. and you will see what I told you about this suburb construction. Sorry for the music, it's a Japanese musician. So this is a sculpture outside, which it transfers from the polyurethane to polyester or epoxy. So this, you will see, is this sculpture will become part of the large Villa Falbala. And this is the beginning of what when he began to work with the forms. It's still two faces sculptures, but he cut the tour and you arrive to give a sort of movement. It's a glass of water. That we have to cut. You're too far. Just after that. So this is this is a part which is interesting because you can see the way people were working with him, the assistant in the studio. Here, this is the Jardin d'Hiver. You have the model upstairs, and this is the real things which is now at the Centre Pompidou. And this is a model of Chambre au lit sous l'arbre, which is also upstairs.
L'équipe d'assistants de Jean Dubuffet travaille à son agrandissement.
And now this is the Villa Falbella in Riol. But at a time where the villa was not painted yet. And you,
Des ateliers, la Villa Falbella, au centre d'un jardin entouré de multitudes et pins, la closerie Falbella.
you see the door here, which is the one we saw in colors in the garden. And the funny thing is that you see the houses around of the suburb, which are probably not so pleased to have that under their windows. You can see by the way she is moving that everything is completely not planned. And of course, the black lines create an illusion so that if you go there, you really take some risk because where it seems to be flat, it's not flat, and so on. You see, as you have seen on the model, at the beginning the idea was that the villa was painted in colors, but finally it's only black and white.
Ici à Pimlott, chez Jean Dubuffet, à quelques kilomètres de Paris, une vingtaine de kilomètres, les 5 grands centres de mouvement, Jean Dubuffet avait marqué depuis 7 ans.
which is upstairs. This is the cabinet, the center of the Villa Falbala.
Perhaps we should start in half an hour, so perhaps we soon should go out and look a bit at the show. Because so many people who doesn't understand the French.
Yes, but this is the only part where he's speaking. The other things are completely visual, and I think it's important. But I think so. And now we will see what you have upstairs. A very large model for La Défense. for the size, it's 60 meters by 70 meters, which means 4,200 square meters. And this is, of course, the one, as you can see, that he has been working quite a lot. He talked about the access of the public and everything never existed. No. And now the last thing is very important for me, because this is the sort of theater play that he has done called Coucou Bazar. And you will see it's the only elements which exist of the first version. You will see this construction. And in a certain sense, what is important is that for me, it's exactly the same problem as going from painting to sculpture and from sculpture to architecture. In reality, this is the idea that Lourloup was a complete world, and that, in a certain sense, becoming an architect, he was making the Lourloup existing in the real world. And with Coucou Bazar, he began to make, in a certain sense, a life. And it's really something like a sort of demiurgic vision. This is the dog, one of the dogs. Okay, so because it seems that the schedule is so short, we will try to go quicker to the end, so that you will see Coucou Bazar as nobody has ever seen it, which is a quick version of Coucou Bazar, but it would be nice if he was there to, because if I do something on it, it will get some problems.
You want to move it?
Yeah, to put the... C'est ça, mais normalement. Which normally is very slow, but she's... I don't know why they asked me to come, because...
You want to go forward.
Yeah, no, I want to go quicker, which is here.
Ah, okay. You do it.
No, don't.
Thank you. Like 2 times.
It's just 4 times the speed of the normal thing. But the audio and use this system of using an angle of the last thing and to have this. But you see that even these figures is really a flat thing which has been folded. It's not really a 3-dimensional thing. And when you look at that, and when you look, for example, Le Salon d'été, you see how finally, through the architecture, it became a real sculpture using the 3-dimensional space to really create something. I think this is important. So now we can speak together when we overwhelmed. Should we go through the you were very upset about the timing. For the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York. And he asked him to have a sculpture by Dubuffet, but having no idea what it was. Dubuffet was very enthusiastic, and at that moment he received a rather cool reception of the architect of the building, Gordon Bunshaft, who was one of the most important American architects who got the Pritzker Prize, and who was with Owen Smearers and Skidmore. Bunshaft was thinking that probably it was not such a good idea. He liked Dubuffet as an artist, but suddenly having something like that, and also because Dubuffet says, okay, the sculpture will be 24-meter high. In relation to the building, Bunshaft thought that it was a little too much. Because he has done something with Noguchi, but he asked to Noguchi to build something which will be completely under the level of the vision. So it's a hall with a fountain and so on. So 24 meters was a little too much. And then he began to work with Dubuffet. And they finally really created something together. Because Dubuffet made finally 12 different models for the sculpture. And the committee of the chairs decided for 4, and then for this group of 4 trees. But what was beautiful as a model became completely different as soon as we put it outside in 24-meter highs in a public plaza in New York. So Bunshaft has been working, for example, on the fact that inside all the technical structures are done in a way that if there is some wind or with the snow weight, there is a small move of the surface which is possible. And everything, in a certain sense, it looks like a sort of very natural and very simple thing. And when you arrive to the end, in reality, it's a very complex thing. And the same thing arrived also with Villa Falbala, which inside has an incredible technical structure. In the catalogue of the exhibition, you will see the wire structure of the things. It's incredible. It has been done by Gordon Bunshaft as a sort of tribute to Dubuffet. and with Reggie Renault, because they were using at that time the only computer which was able to make 3,000 point of reference on a volume. And it's an incredible feature. This is the other one which has been constructed at Reading. It's in Netherlands. It's Jardin des Marais, and it's in the Column, which is one of the most beautiful museums of sculpture in Europe. And it's a very, very large park. And of course, there is something which is absolutely incredible, where this sort of Zen garden, completely black and white, inside of the very green part of Netherlands. And when you enter in it, you have suddenly this feeling that you are going through a border, that you enter in another world. And this is exactly what, in a certain sense, the architecture of Dubuffet was trying to do. In a certain, for me, I think that he had in mind, when he began to work with sculpture and architecture, to do the same he has done in painting, to forget about all what I would say is the classical laws of the techniques, and to make something completely different, to make something which will be just the freedom of the thinking and the sort of unnatural vision of the things. And so now we go to this Villa Falbala, because you want to see Villa Falbala. So you see it of the photograph as it is really today, and you have the scale. But I think you have a better idea of the scale of the surface of the movie. And this was the first idea to have it completely painted. And you have seen in the garden this sort of arch with a door, which was a door which is somewhere here. Fine, it's in the other direction. No, I forget in what sense we have put it.
This side, no, from that side.
Yes, it can be only this side. Just here, if you look here, you have this arch, which is in reality the entrance. This is the entrance inside where you have the cabinet logique that you saw, and the other small door is the one which arrives inside of the technical part, where you see, because in a certain sense it's like a sort of empty volume, and inside of the empty volume you have the sculpture of cabinet logique. And there is nothing is. Two things are not connected one to the other. And it's a very unusual also system of thinking. And when you enter, which is very beautiful, you see the door here, here to the right. You enter, everything outside is black and white. You enter a small corridor which is turning, and which is with smaller drawings than outside, a little smaller drawings, which are black, blue, and white. And finally, you enter inside of the cabinet logique, which has very small drawings, which are with the colors you have seen, blue, red, and so on. And it's exactly like if you were entering in something where the system of the blood is represented. You have the blue blood, and suddenly you enter in the half of the place, which is the cabinet logique, which is the reason why he has built that. Okay, you've got somehow we can sit somewhere and speak.
Yes, we can. So up again, and now we go down. And thank you, Danielle, for telling us all those things about Jean Dubuffet, and we are very happy with this exhibition, which is, for me, absolutely a marvelous way to meet with Jean Dubuffet. So the curating of the show has been incredibly good, I think, and we also got special, very good critics. But now I think I will give the floor to our participants in this panel, and I think you should just open your mind to say whatever could be something that came into your mind, and when you have been listening now to Daniel Abadi looking at this sort of architecture, which is really a sort of, and please, Mark, you are a visitor in Sweden.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the films and your explanation of the works in the exhibition, which were very, very illuminating. One thing that struck me as we were looking at these pieces, and I was particularly interested in the project for the work at La Défense, which is this monumental piece. Either somebody's knocking at the door or somebody's trying to get in. Is that better? Yeah. Is that work, or the possibility of that work, perhaps most provokes the possibility of being architecture? It's closest to the condition that architecture has. In other words, it's in the world amongst other things, having productive relationships with those other things, and it makes real situations for people to be with each other. And I was very fascinated by his description of it, because of course he talks about it as first as a kind of obstacle in this grand axe that exists at La Défense, and then in a way as a kind of garden. The interior is a garden, complete with house and interior and staircase where you look, but the exterior becomes a kind of a park itself, because people can sit all the way around the edge of it. My own experience is one, I've been on both sides of this divide of artist and architect. I began as an architect, became an artist, inadvertently and against my will started working with architects again, with the problem of making works of art for real places, sometimes as real places. And when these works become almost like buildings, people get very anxious, because I would like to make these works so they're not buildings. They are about the condition of the environment, but they are not actually architecture. And I suppose there may be some confusion, of course, in the title of Dubuffet as architect, because it seems to me that these works are environments which evoke and reflect upon other environments, the environments we use. But they are representations, they have the capacity to be commentary on the environment and on architecture, like architecture can never be. And of course they do that by having all sorts of aspects, or lacking all sorts of aspects that architecture has. I'm not talking about technical things, but the issues the issue of occupation, for example, of being constantly there, constantly receiving light, constantly being open to the environment, constantly being open to people. And these are, of course, the work of art has a very particular type of attention, and you said something about it, walking onto this surface, or the surfaces of these works as being walking into another world, and that's a very precise thing. In fact, they're other than the world. They're reflections upon the world, where you can, where you're conscious of yourself in a completely different way than architecture ever makes you conscious of yourself. Those are my impressions. I'll pass it on to Mattias.
Thank you for the tour, number one, and this funky 70s movie documentary thing. I was thinking, wondering what he was kind of aiming for, being a painter, and then going for sculpture, kind of two-dimensional reliefs, maybe, and then the space-like sculptures.
Hör ni vad han säger?
Prata högre. Okay, and then going for this architectural or space-oriented sculptures. What he was aiming for, what he wanted to achieve as a question. You said something. You said that entering into another world, as his earlier paintings, maybe. But what was he aiming for? Do you think?
No, I told, but we have to be so quick that it's difficult to go deep. I told that there is something which is important for me. I just thought of that when I was looking at the movie this afternoon to know where to cut. All this happens at a very specific period. He began to work with the large panels for Nanterre in '65. The first thing which has been built is '72. And at the same time, in '68, Dubuffet, who was not a gauchist, it's at least an obvious thing, wrote a book which was absolutely very important for a lot of people on the relation of culture and individual. And I think that in a certain sense, there is something of the idea to go further on what is called architecture by architect. And in a certain sense, if I thought of that, at the same time, it was the beginning of the works that Nikit Saint-Phal was also doing. And also, I think that if there is something which is before him, it's le palais idéal du facteur Cheval. And this is the idea of an architecture which is of no use except the pleasure. When he made the first exhibition about this architect's projects, it was in '68 at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, and he made a small book with some photo montage that you have here. And I just thought of something today, that he has chosen very specifically the places where he wanted to introduce his project of architecture. And he used exactly very typical places. Place Victor Hugo, Place des Victoires. Place des Victoires is a place of the 17th century with the statue of Louis XIV in the center. And he used this place, which is a perfect model of 17th century architecture, to install something. And on Place Victor Hugo, this is the Haussmann Parisian buildings, something also a sort of model of architecture. And in a certain way, it is a way to say that he refused all this history of the architecture to arrive to something new. And I think that this is important. And, you know, it's a little difficult to explain, and mostly in English. But, for example, when he has created the idea of art brut, in a certain sense, he has done in architecture something which was parallel to the idea he had with art brut. And I would say that when I say Facteur Cheval, it's in relation to something. One of the persons who was the most interested in art brut was André Breton, who was one of the founders of the art brut company. And they get in a terrible conflict in 2 years, because in a certain sense, they have not the same idea about art brut. For Breton, the art brut was l'art des fous, the people, the mad people, the art of the mad people. And for Dubuffet, it was the art of the people who were not responding to the concept of the society. In a certain sense, I say he was not a gauchist, but he was a perfect anarchist. And I think that in a certain sense, his architecture is a sort of anarchist concept of architecture.
Thank you. I will try to open my heart to this architecture, and I think it's so fascinating to see Dubuffet's architecture, and I think it's fantastic to see this exhibition here and to be able to see all these models. And I would like to thank the museum here for doing this and doing this show. I think it's wonderful. I think it's also interesting to reflect on the work of Dubuffet in the sense that he's one of the few people who has created this environment, and it's really living a vision. He had this vision, and he realized it, which I think is fantastic. And I think he also comes from a tradition. Being an art historian, you can see how he comes from a certain tradition, and when you study art history, he's always connected to Francis Bacon and Giacometti and that group of people. And then later he becomes and he does something completely different. And I'm now working on an exhibition with a Swedish artist called Carl Otto Hultén. And when he went to France the first time, he went to see Palais Ideal. That's why he went to France. And I think there's a similarity in this urge and this willingness to create something new, a new vision. These artists created these very strong visions of something different, something else. And I think Dubuffet is one of the few artists and architects, if you will, who really managed to do this in such a beautiful and poetic and fantastic way. So I think it's so impressive when you see his work. And when you go back and look at these other artists that I mentioned before, like Giacometti's work, for example, is very much about scale, how he worked with scale, how you look at these different smaller versions, the larger versions, and I think in Dubuffet's work, it's also about scale, and he's really good with the scale. When you look at these trees in front of Chase Manhattan Bank, for example, how he manages to do these trees, 24-meter high trees, in that space. He's so good with this, how he creates this in the right scale, and there is something very impressive about this. So that's what I would like to say to begin with.
I have a question about when we were looking at this landscape up above, the landscape environments, this rather disturbing quality they have. You talked about the illusion, and there's this delineation of all the changes in surfaces with the line. Of course, when you see that, you see a landscape drawn, constructed. It is rather disorienting, by this. And I was just wondering if you could say something about his position regarding that strategy, for example, this outlining, this fantastic quality of drawing, which makes the landscapes and the interiors so unnerving?
The difficult point is that when you look at the model, you see the drawing. And when you are inside of the construction, you don't see at all. You see the walls, but for example, you have no idea of the floor. And even, I say, because it's really a personal experience. For years, I took my students each year to Fondation, and one day we arrived in winter, and there has been snowing. And white snow on this black and white floor is very strange. And I think that the reason why he created these lines, which doesn't go with the surface, is that because you are absolutely obliged to look at every inches you make on the floor, otherwise you are sure you fall. And I think that it's something, this is the key of his relation to architecture, I think. Even in his painting, he explains something which explains why he has done all this materiology and texturology in the 50s, at the end of the 50s, from 58 to 59. They are supposed to be sort of piece of earth. And he says, when you walk, you look in front of you, or you look at your feet because you want to put your feet at a place. But there is a distance that you never look, which is between your feet and your eye. And what I want to show is this sort of things that escape to the perception. And in a certain sense, the use he has of the surface on the floor is this experience that you have to be sudden. Of course, if when we go upstairs to look at the exhibition, we never thought about where we were putting our feet. Maybe in the staircase. But it's just a sort of natural way to do. And what he wants is that you become conscious of any instant of your life and any perception of what is around you. And I think that in a certain sense, this is the reason why he became so upset with Breton. Because Breton was interested in the supraconsciousness. And what he was wanting was an acute consciousness. And this is probably the difference, and also the way why all his work has been moving so quickly from one phase to another one. Because each time he was doing something, he was seeing that something was missing. And so he has to go to what was missing. And I think that it's the reason why suddenly Lourloup became such a long time, because Lourloup in itself allowed him to go through everything from the small drawings, which was done with a pen, speaking on the phone and making automatic drawings. And suddenly looking at that, he discovered that if he cut a part of the drawing, he has a figure which was emerging. And this was the beginning of 12 years to arrive to Villa Falbala and to Coucou Bazar, which I say, as I say, was really a sort of demiurgic project to create life with what has been done by the artist.
This is a related story, and the architect Karl Friedrich Schinkel, who designed the Altes Museum in Berlin. I don't know if you're familiar with the rotunda of this museum, but it has very, very strange quality to it. It's partly the zenithal light, but mostly it has to do with the drawing of the space. The drawing of the space, which is drawn actually over top of all the contours of the room, all of the classical detail is painted as though painted again, painted as a drawing on top of the detail. And this extends to the design of the floor, which is, it's in a diamond pattern, but it follows a kind of the laws of perspective. So when you're actually in the room, you're incredibly conscious of yourself as being in a real place and a representation of the place at the same time, and you're hyper conscious of your being. Let's put it that way. In terms of architecture as sculpture or sculpture as architecture, I was also thinking that there are architects, wild architects like Friedrich Kiesler, who was making these kind of non-specific, no uses except pleasure type of houses, but possible architecture, looking like a tooth or being a cave and so on. But this aspect of perception that you describe is really is a very, very special condition of Dubuffet's work, and I'll pass it on to my friends.
I was thinking of something not completely different, but what was his relation to pop art and the outline and, blue, red, yellow, and, I mean...
I don't need that. The relation to pop art is very difficult. I mean, in reality, it's not an ice cream. For example, one of the people who became really very interested very early in the work of Dubuffet was Eduardo Paolozzi. And Paolozzi came to meet Dubuffet in 1949, if I am right. Just before he began to make the projection IVICA of the image taken in magazine, which are really the beginning of the pop art. And at the same time, I said at the beginning that he says that Léger, he liked Léger quite a lot, even when we spoke about that, it was maybe 2 years before he died. He was 83, and I have to say that it's the only artist I have heard that he was still fond of at that time. I mean, he was not interested in the art of other artists, because it was art. He was interested in any things which was outside of the artistic circle. And for example, one of the strangest things I have seen from him, Cuckoo Bazaar has been done 3 times. I saw the 3 versions, which is a rather hard experience. Because even a no spectacle is something like a gangster movie in relation to Cuckoo Bazaar. And when he yes, done this 3 version, the first one was the Guggenheim. He says in the movie he's very proud of that, but he decided that it was an awful thing. And then when it was in Paris, he obliged the museum, I was working at that museum at that time, he obliged the museum to use the same team of dancers which were in New York, so we have to pay for 20 dancers coming for 3 weeks in Paris just for rehearsal. And then he decided that it was a disaster and that he sent, the day of the opening, he sent a letter, an open letter to anyone telling that this Cuckoo Bazaar was not at all what he had in mind, and that he has just to say to people, don't go there. And so the 3rd version was in Torino, in Italy, where Fiat has made an exhibition of him. Of course, after Renault and the problem of Salon d'été, Fiat was the most fabulous car company in the world. And they redo Cuckoo Bazaar with a woman called Anna Seina, who has made the direction of the play. And this was another version, a little different, but not so much. But Anna Segna sent him for 2 years or 3 years small letters with collages, with pieces of clothes and things like that. And each time he received a letter, and it was almost a letter every 2 days, he has boxes of all the letters with, for each of these letters, a description written by himself, telling what was it, what elements were installed, and so on. It's a complete nomenclatura of the works. And I have to say that I cannot see any interest at all in these works. But she was not an artist. And this was the key of everything. And probably the relation he has to pop art was that. I mean, the pop artist was were interested in his work.
Maybe he was more interested in that kind of culture rather than I mean, there's obvious visual similarity.
You know, it was so complex. I mean, for example, the strange thing, this man, who was one of the most clever artists I ever met, and one of the most sophisticated artists on the intellectual level I have ever met, has no books. He was reading his books with a very strange system. He has une règle, a ruler, and each time he has finished a page, he cuts the page and he throws it away. Which is very interesting, because if you know that you cannot refine the book, you have to remember what is inside. This is a difference with photocopy and copying by hand. And at the same time, for example, one day I arrived late in the afternoon when he was seeing people, and I arrived and he was reading a book which I like quite a lot, which is the autobiography of Aristoclas of Gertrude Stein. And he was rereading that book. And he said, oh, it's not interesting at all. It's just a story of very intellectual people. And this was the way he was. He was wanting to cut, but he knew everything. I mean, so he knew perfectly well what Rauschenberg was doing. He knew what Johns was doing. But he cannot be interested because it was art. And if Rauschenberg has done the same thing outside, you know, he met Pollock once in New York in '54. He has one collector, Alfonso Osorio, who was the biggest collector of Jackson Pollock and Dubuffet. He has something like 20 Dubuffet and 12 Jackson Pollock, and not small works. And when he came to New York, I think it was his first trip to New York, Osorio said, okay, come to my house, you have a special apartment with an entrance, a private entrance and so on. And Osorio, as any American people, decided to invite people to meet Dubuffet, who was making a show at Matisse. And Pollock was there. They have not said a word. And he decided, the day after, he decided to leave Osorio's house because there was too much people and that he was not in New York to see people of that sort.
I would like to ask you, did he see himself as an architect? Did he ever talk about himself as an architect?
No. In a certain sense, I have to say that it was a provocation. Yes, seen it. It was a provocation of myself to say Dubuffet architect. In French, it works. It's not as an architect, it's architect. Just because, of course, nobody thinks of Dubuffet as architect. She's wanting, absolutely. But at the same time, he would not have liked at all the idea of Dubuffet as architect, but he would not have liked at all Dubuffet as a painter. It's almost the same for him. And in a certain sense, what interested me is that the work is not only the work of a painter, is, for example, one of the best writers in French of the 20th century. It's absolutely incredible. He was very close friend with Céline, and it's not for just public relation. I mean, because he knew that Céline was reinventing the French literature. And the way he's writing is very difficult. For example, if you have accustomed to the way he's writing, I know so many people who have written on him because he was also a very clever analyst of his own work. And a lot of critics are just copying his style without even thinking, because it's so well done that you get the model almost immediately.
Perhaps we should go to think about architecture today. You, Mark, do you see something with Dubuffet in what is architecture today?
That's a very interesting question. I think there are architects, a lot of architects, trying to invent form and using all sorts of techniques and calculations in order to invent things which hadn't been seen. But I think the difference, of course, is that their interests are really not so much to do with Dubuffet's interests. And, you know, I always think that the Dubuffet pieces are reflections back on life we actually live. It's not something completely new, it's something turned. So we can see what we are, how we occupy the world. And so I think for all the maybe superficial resemblances that might exist between, like, Frank Gehry's work, I'm just pulling something out of the hat, or those architects who are called so-called parametric designers, there's very little about their work which is about reflecting back on the world. And so that's the big difference. Although I do think, you know, people are trying to find ways out of the ordinary. I have not yet encountered among those architects who are interested in people. That's maybe a bit harsh, but I do think that. No, I think they're interested in themselves and form making, and you know, it's inevitable that these. It's very interesting that Dubuffet's commissions are associated with car companies and big money and so on and so forth. But, you know, because we see this very, very demonstrative architecture coming from, you know, oil countries, and you know, it's again a demonstration of cash. I'm not suggesting that Dubuffet's work is a demonstration of cash, but it seems to be very difficult to extricate itself from that world, big money.
Yes. I was, for a long time, I was very interested in this kind of utopian architecture that developed in the desert. I think in Arizona. Yeah, and there were people moving out there and doing their own projects, and I think there is a similarity in a certain way because of the organic structures of these buildings, the structures, or whatever you might call them. And I think also someone like Buckminster Fuller, for example, is also this kind of utopian, visionary person who is doing something similar to what the Dubuffet is doing. But if he doesn't see himself as an architect, he's really a sculptor or whatever you want to call him. I think he didn't want to be defined as anything, probably. He was just resisting all these definitions, and there are these people who try to create utopian visions, and I think you should look for those kinds of similarities with if you want to compare him to something. But I think in the end he is unique. There's nothing that you can really compare him to. There's only one Dubuffet. Yeah.
something, because when you speak about Gay, for example, when he has built the Villa Falbala, it has been a terrible problem because it took a long time. The elements, the technical elements were not okay, and the men who were supposed to make the relation, everything was wrong at the beginning until he finally got the solution of Bonshaft and Renault together. But to protect the construction, the one who built the external structure was Hans Walter Müller, which means that he knew perfectly well about, I don't know, the gonflable, inflatable architecture at a time where almost nobody has heard about it. And this was always this sort of incredible double-side people.
It's interesting when you see Tour aux Figures, the tower, which is 24 meters high. And when we meet the public here, making guided tours, they ask, are there any windows? Can we look out from the tower? and then you read about the tower inside, and you see the inside, and there is no doors. And Dubuffet said he didn't want any doors. And there is no furniture. You can't be there because you shouldn't be there as in a house. That was not his idea. And he says, you move up in the tower like a goat of the mountain goat. So he wants absolutely other ways to be in those spaces. And when you are in those spaces, you feel really that you are in something, something which is very, very special. I mean, when I visited this spring Closerie Falbala, I mean, it's one of my most strange experience I had being in a room. So, I mean, he really made it.
Isn't it like a fairy tale in some way, to enter something totally different, and you don't really know what's upside down, where to put your next step. You're not familiar to it at all. I mean, with no use and kind of crazy and beautiful, of course. In this, imagine running away and finding new spots and angles and
If I can say, I would say that it's the opposite of a fairy tale, because a fairy tale you always know how it finished. The prince is always getting in love with the shepherd, and so here it's completely different. I think that what he was interested in, Elisabet was telling about what he was telling about Tour and the goat, but he said something which is beautiful in French. He says, on y est obligé au vivre sans bagage. You are obliged to live there without any luggage. You have no furniture, you have nothing. He said, the only luxury you have is that you discover the space. And this is exactly what he liked, that suddenly you arrive to a new approach of the most simple things. It's not like a fantasy world. What he would like is that your experience of the reality would be without all the lecture you have by culture, that suddenly you arrive to, you are the first one on the world and you discovered the world. And if you succeed to do even a small part of the program, it's becoming very interesting.
Just to reinforce that, were these screens which effectively delineated each landscape, were they essential for achieving that kind of separateness, do you think? Because there are these these are isolated landscapes in a way. You know, there's a certain line which is blocked from the horizon, walls come up, and you're in a special little zone.
Yes, because you have to be surprised at any moment. So suddenly, if you are blocked, you have another feeling that if you have a perspective. And everything is that way. I mean, all the time is, for example, what is not said in the movie, and that I discovered very recently on the project for La Défense, on this large wall with the window. The windows are there because at the end, the engineers has decided that for 1 kilometer it was too long, so they decided to make a train on a rail which will be at the level of first floor or second floor here. And so the windows are, in a way, the possibility for people who are in the train to suddenly have a glimpse inside of the construction. So everything is done that way. You have to be surprised at each moment. And I think that, in a certain sense, probably it would have been his own definition of art. Stay surprised.
We are very close to the next program. I got a hint from Elisabet, Beta, and we should close this part of the evening very soon. And perhaps there is someone in the public or some of you here who wants to say something to this meeting with art and architecture, very together with our Jean Dubuffet, who is very present here.
I just wanted to say something first, excuse me. The description you gave of Dubuffet now in the end makes me think of Olaf Eliasson, for example, who also is very interested in space and is discovering space and how we move in space. Or James Turrell, for example, who is also very interested in that. So there are artists today working with these specific problems, but not in the same way as he did.
This is the only interesting thing in art. That's the change.
Someone wants to...
I heard you said he was an anarchist in the beginning, and then you were using this notion for the visitor that he is absolutely obliged. So that's what left of the anarchism. The visitor cannot be an anarchist. He is absolutely obliged. I wonder if you have a comment.
Are we obliged or are we free with the buffet?
You are not obliged because you can completely forget him. But I think that it would be too easy if people were only one block. And of course, all Dubuffet is in this very contradictory system. If he had only one solution, he would have done I don't know, let me see. Like Polyakov, he would have done the same painting for 25 years. When you look at the painting of 1944, and when you look after that to a painting of 1958, and when you look at the Loop, and when you look at the last one, like the Mir, you wonder, and suddenly this is like Picasso. It's never the same, but it's always obvious that it can be the only author of that. And I think that this is really a key of the problem. But it's true, he was probably an anarchist, because, but I I don't know if he was an anarchist to give to anyone the possibility to do anything possible. He was an anarchist for himself. Let's say he was an egoist anarchist.
Okay. Then I should perhaps thank you. Thank you all for being here, and should we continue to the next part? Thank you, Daniel, for coming all the way from Canada, now going back to France.
May I have 1 second? I would like to say something just about this exhibition. This exhibition is here only because Elisabet is wanting to get it, with a lot of problems. It was a very heavy exhibition, a very expensive one. It was probably over every possibilities of the museum, and she has solved all the problems to get this exhibition that she was wanting to have. And if there is somebody that you have to thank, it's her.